Jill Underly of Hollandale is one of 7 candidates for the office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. The primary is February 16th. The general election is April 6th. Jill, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I've enjoyed interviewing. You're the 6th candidate, and I have a standard opening question. You have 1 minute to describe why you're the most qualified candidate.
All right, very good. My platform is all about equity, giving every child what they need every day. And this was crafted from my own experiences as a parent of 2 children, a teacher, an elementary and high school principal, a UW student affairs professional, and an administrator at DPI, both in educator licensing and in Title I, which is federal programs that I worked on in Milwaukee and Green Bay. And most lately as the superintendent of the Pecatonica Area School District. I'm all about public schools, 100% all the way. I support public schools, and I'll advocate for increased funding in mental health, early childhood, and teacher recruitment. Plus, I'm the only candidate who's currently leading a school district during the pandemic. I've seen firsthand the inequities that exist in our neediest schools. The pandemic has amplified the needs for universal early childhood programming, affordable high-speed wireless internet, and the need for collaboration. And I have experience working with school boards, administrators, union leaders, legislators, and professional organizations at the local, state, and federal level.
Well, I want to talk about one provision on your campaign site. Adequate and fair funding. Can you be more specific? Are you talking about going beyond the 2/3 state funding? Are you talking about reducing the amount of property taxes that goes for K-12? Talk to me a little bit more about what adequate and fair funding means, please.
Sure. Adequate and fair funding means that every school has what they need, or every school district has what they need to provide for the kids. We have always said that the promise has been 2/3 funding, and we know that that promise, especially in the last decade and a half, has not materialized. We see a lot of discrepancies, especially with the introduction of new categorical aids such as per pupil aids. And also our school districts do not get fully reimbursed for special education costs. And so, right now it's around 30%. And so our school districts have to transfer large sums from their general fund to cover special education because we have to balance those out. And my district transfers almost $500,000 every year. And that money comes from programs that serve all kids. And so the state needs to step up their obligation.
What about now? You said you're the only superintendent that's been dealing with COVID. Talk about the criteria that determines when a district must go online and when it can go back to in person. Should there be a statewide criteria, or should it stay on a school district by school district basis, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously a hot issue, and as you indicated, it's a very complicated one as well. But when you think about it, we have to keep our kids safe as well as our staff safe. And so the criteria that go into that is, can we keep our kids safe and staff safe? You look at facilities, you look at the age of buildings, the fresh air intake, for example. We look at the capacity to space kids out. My school district has given parents the option of in-person or being entirely virtual, and parents seem to like that choice. But I get that not every school district can have that choice. It needs to be a local decision made jointly with school boards, county or local health officials, teachers and union leaders and administrators, and parents. And so that's what we did. Last summer we met and we developed our plan to reopen, and we made sure all the voices were heard.
Well, you earlier you said that your district has about 400 students. I'm just curious, what percentage are back in person and what percentage are online? Just a quick follow up.
Yeah, absolutely. The beginning of the semester, I'm saying like back in September, it was about 80% were in person and 20% were online. And since then, that 20% has dwindled down to maybe around 8 or 5, between 5 and 8%. So not very many kids now, but sometimes like I said, we give parents that option. We don't, we don't penalize kids for it, of course, either. So it's been very fluid.
The state now is getting ready to vaccinate teachers beginning in March 1. This is an issue. I'm going to ask specifically about our 2 largest districts, MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools, and Madison. Do you think teachers should be vaccinated before they go back to in person? And I'm only asking about our 2 largest urban districts.
Sure.
What your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that that would be a wise path to consider. Part of the reason that we have to keep our schools closed and go virtual is because if our staff do get sick, we don't have enough subs or enough staff to cover those classes. And so, other than a health and safety reason, obviously we want people to be safe. It's really a staffing issue. And I think, our largest urban districts struggle with recruiting and retaining teachers just as much as our rural school districts do. And our sub pools are consistently older, often retired teachers. And so I think, that should be on the table for sure.
Well, I want to ask you about debate in the state Senate. It was about 2 weeks ago. There was an amendment offer that said, while there is an emergency pandemic, test scores should not be made public. What's your feeling about that, please?
I get a lot of questions on this. Again, it's really an issue of equity. I mean, what are the scores going to tell us? If we test, and what it's going to show is that the best resourced kids, the ones with the most opportunities, are going to weather this just fine. So my advice or my recommendation would be to focus on local assessments, and let's ensure access to the curriculum through virtual or face-to-face instruction and move forward in that respect.
Have you got some students in your school district that do not have, or because of the geography, they do not have internet at home? How are your teachers reaching them?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did was we issued every child a Chromebook 2 years ago. So we were well situated, I suppose, when the pandemic hit back in March of last year. So what we did was, for the kids who struggled with internet access, we issued them a hotspot. And so that really reached the vast majority of our kids back in the spring. And we haven't had many issues with that since the fall. It's like there's different things that we can do, around that, like with like boosters and things like that we can issue too. So they have access.
The achievement gap numbers in MPS, Madison, and Racine are really kind of stunning. How would you close those achievement gap numbers as superintendent?
Sure. So it's a very good question, and obviously it's very concerning. My plan is to start young. And again, I prefer the term opportunity gaps, because when you say achievement, we're really putting that responsibility on the kids for this gap. And in reality, it's from a century of racist state and local policies that have denied opportunities to kids based on skin color, gender, ability, and socioeconomic status. So let's get every child what they need every day. Early childhood education, well-trained and passionate educators, and mental health support. And again, fund our public schools the way that they should be funded, because then that's what provides the opportunities for our kids to be successful.
When I look at the state budget, choice has grown over the last 20, 25 years. Now it's a $750 million item. Mm-hmm. Should it be held where it is? Should it be expanded? Should it be dialed back? Choice.
So right now, I think it's too much. Public education dollars must go to public schools. I would be advocating for a freeze or a moratorium on voucher school expansion, for starters. And most people throughout the state have no idea how much of their tax dollars goes to private school vouchers and choice. And so I would work to make sure that our public, statewide, rural, and urban school districts and the communities in those are more educated on this.
Well, the COVID-19, what has it taught you as a as a veteran about the mental health impact on our K-12 students, please?
Yeah, certainly there's things such as technology that we were worried about before the pandemic hit. We were always worried about kids' mental health because of technology and their increased isolation, anxiety, and depression. What I've learned is that we need to keep the resources we have to get more resources to our kids, but that kids are also resilient. They've been taught to reach out, to adults. And some of the best strengths I want to say about working in a rural community, as well as in an urban community, when teachers have those connections to kids reach out to their teachers. And so, mental health was certainly one of those inequities that we saw before the pandemic, and the pandemic just really amplified the need for more mental health services in our schools. But kids are resilient, and I do want to, put more resources towards mental health for our kids.
School districts have been living, with revenue limits for more than 20 years. Is it time to get rid of those limits?
Yeah, I think so. In my experience, so at Pecatonica, we've had to go to 2 referendums while I've been superintendent. And really, every time we pass a referendum in Wisconsin, and this last election, I think it was over 90% of operational referendums passed. I mean, clearly we have people who support their public schools. But what that also does is every time a referendum is passed, it makes our school funding system more inequitable. So I think, we need a new funding system in Wisconsin, and perhaps it shouldn't have revenue limits. I think the other question we need to ask is that, the amount of money that goes to voucher schools and independent charter schools, they don't ever have to go to referendum. They never have to ask taxpayers for increasing their revenue because they get their money right off the top. And so we need a new funding system that is equitable both for urban and rural schools.
With that new funding system, would it be a stipend? The state would guarantee X amount per child, and then local districts could add to that? Are you talking about a per pupil grant?
I mean, that's one way to look at it. Again, it's kind of going back to the 2/3 funding, right? And the promise of public schooling in Wisconsin and making sure that our schools have what they need to be successful.
Okay. Let me ask you this, since I've asked all the other candidates. So you're a classroom teacher, civics or government. How would you teach about what happened in the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, please?
Sure. So I am a former social studies teacher. I didn't know if you knew that or not. And since January 6th, I've thought considerably, what I would have done or how I would have taught it. And first, I think we need to acknowledge that there's still a lot of shock still about that day and a lot of pressure on our teachers to bring that day and its lessons to life. So how would I teach it? We need to ensure that kids understand that there are 3 branches of government and none is more powerful than the other. They also need to understand and accept that the United States' democracy and its legitimacy is based on a peaceful transfer of power. And I think I would dissect the day's events, the timeline perhaps, hour by hour, minute by minute, as to what was happening in all areas of the federal government and around the Capitol, almost an investigative look at it, and have the kids be the journalists in that situation.
Okay, maybe one final question. We've talked about a bunch of issues. I want to give you a chance to talk about an issue that's central to your campaign that we haven't landed on yet, please.
Sure. Well, I'm really excited and looking forward to getting to work. And I think that there are some low-hanging fruit, such as expanding early childhood access for our kids, getting them interventions early on, and setting them up for a lifetime of success. It makes my heart glow just to think about how all the good that we could accomplish in Wisconsin in both our rural and urban communities with small acts such as universal early childhood programming, because every kid deserves these things every day.
Very good. Thank you. Jill Underlee of Hollandale is one of 7 candidates for the office of State Superintendent of Public Instruction. The primary is February 16th. The general election is April 6th. Jill, thank you so much for talking to WisconsinEye. Appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Stay safe. Thank you.